So I said, this is the guy who was on the stage. This is much better, right? On the stage before this band. And my 8-year-old looks at Derek Webb and says, you're really a good singer. So he's into it. The title for this session is called The Idolatry of Politics. And I got asked a question at the end of the last session with 2 minutes to go, which says, let's talk about whether Christians should vote or not, since that was a big controversy in the last election. But he only gave me 2 minutes, so we didn't get very far. So this whole session is kind of about his last question. Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit, but I really want to talk with you about this, because I know you got a lot of questions about politics, and so do I. But I want to really hear from the questions in the room. What is an idol? We say something's an idol. And come on, all you theologians. Now, Frank Shaver's careful about theology, so I won't use theology too much, but we need a... Yes, sir. Okay, it replaces God. It takes the place of God, okay? Are the things we make idols of always just all bad things? No. It's usually too much of it, right? It's too much. It's putting it in the place of God.
It's imbalance.
Imbalance, that's right. Not balance, okay. I want to suggest that we sometimes make two mistakes, making too much of politics or too little of politics. And I think both are a mistake. So I've written a lot about this. I did a book called God's Politics, Why the Right Gets It Wrong and the Left Doesn't Get It. Thank you for reminding me of the subtitle there. I did one called The Soul of Politics. And we did a bumper sticker once called God is Not a Republican or a Democrat. It was on a lot of cars around the country. And a lot of my work is trying to deal with politics. Now, a couple years ago, a lot of people, maybe people in this room, elected a candidate, and they had a lot of hope about what was going to change from that election. And I think a lot of folks now think that just electing a candidate doesn't always work for you the way that you hoped it might. So what does that say about politics? How does change come? So I'm working on this this book about the idolatry of politics, and I've got these 8 idols. I'll just read them quickly. The idol of money, wasting resources and putting the rich in charge. The idol of power, how the perks and prestige replace public servants. The idol of celebrity, why most leaders don't run. The idol of winning, instead of governing and solving problems. The idol of me, and the loss of community, or as Frank said it well in his last session, the loss of the common spaces. Any notion of the commons. The idol of war and the business of death. The idol of ideology and the end of civility. The idol of Washington and its broken system. So in December, after the election, I got this call to come over and have a little talk with the people in the White House who say they're our friends. And they want to talk about, they want to get, and I said, well, so far you're losing all the big issues, pretty much everything. So, well, and they went into a big defense, and it's those Republicans and all the rest of it. So let me get this straight. You're doing everything you could possibly do, anyone could do. It's just those pesky Republicans. How's that message working for you? Then we talked about how they're deporting more people, undocumented people, than than George Bush did, and how Afghanistan's going pretty much the way that it was before, and how last night the president is now behind public opinion on the issue of Afghanistan, and how they're about to cave in the big tax cuts for the wealthy, for the stratifying the society Frank just talked about here, where 1/10% of the country now owns 25% of the wealth. That's quite a bit, more than ever before. And here's what they said. They said, the system, Jim, is more broken than we even thought when we came in. It's even more broken. And money just controls everything. We didn't realize how bad it was. So along the way, we just decided to work with a broken system and get a few things done. And I said, that's when you should have had your A. Philip Randolph conversation with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. A. Philip Randolph was the leading black labor leader in the country. He was really the mentor for Martin Luther King Jr. His idea, his March on Washington was his idea. He just had this young preacher speak. Or your King conversation with Johnson. Martin King talked with Johnson, and there was a conversation going on between the administration and the movement. And it was happening especially in Mississippi, where the voting rights division of the Justice Department was the portal between the movement and the administration. So I said to them, you should have called the movement people in. You should have said, here's the kind of pressure we need on the outside, the movement on the outside, to make the changes on the inside. Instead, you called in Geithner, Summers, Petraeus, and McChrystal. You called in the wrong people. You're not talking to the right people. So do you have a portal in this administration? Maybe you do, but I haven't run into it. Do you have a portal to the movement? I said, no. Do you think you need one? And they said, we didn't used to think that the first 2 years, but now I think we do. Now, let me just, one day I was, having my usual frustrations about talking to politicians, and I just wrote down, solutions to problems. I call it a little document, solutions to problems, because one thing we're not getting in Washington, D.C. is solutions. We get a lot of blaming. It's their fault. Both sides do it. Both sides want to make you afraid of the problem and blame the other side for it. Neither side wants to ever talk about solutions. And now they're running all the time. It's always the re-election campaign. So there's never a time when they actually govern. Like try to find solutions to problems. So here are my solutions. To solve global poverty, it's really pretty easy. To solve global poverty, invest in women and girls. That's all you gotta do. That's what does it. You invest in women and girls, and you solve global poverty. Rwanda's gone from massacre, genocide, horrific suffering to more progress than almost any other country in the global south. Why? Because all the men got killed in the massacres. And the women are running more Rwanda than any other country in the world. Now, I'm not suggesting that for a solution, but it does point to the problem. Invest in women and girls. I teach a Georgetown class, and we went through this for 2 weeks. And at the end, the student says, why don't we spend all of our resources and time investing in women and girls? It shows you when you do that, everything rises. because the women and girls are taking care of the community. I don't know the answer to their question, but I know that's true. To solve domestic poverty, fix the scandal of education in America. Schools in our poorest places are prisons. Not schools, it ought to be criminal behavior to put kids in those places. The public school next to where I lived for years had kids shot during the day going between classes. I mean, fix education. And Jeff Canada up at the Harlem Children's Center, lots of folks have showed us how to do it. It's not even that difficult. It's just Jeff says, you give me a kid, he has baby college, you give me a kid as a baby, I will guarantee, Mom and Dad, that kid will go to college. I guarantee it. And so far, 100% success. Harlem Children's Home. But that's the first thing being cut, by the way. Did I tell you that? All over the country being cut. Okay. To reduce the debt and deficit, treat budgets as moral documents. To revive the economy, end corporate welfare and socialism for Wall Street. Now, I feel strongly about this. Glenn Beck has called me a socialist. Time and time again. I'm on the board, the Blackboard. I'm going to miss being on the Blackboard. The show's going off the air, and it was always fun to watch. But the truth is we do have socialism in America. Because when 6 banks, and it was 6 banks, it wasn't all the banks, it was 6 banks. When they effectively ruined the country and the economy, we socialized their risk, we bailed them out, and we gave them the cash to invest again, like going to Vegas. And now the only people whose lives have returned to normal, the only people are the folks who caused the problem. As my regular cab driver says, we believe in safety nets in America, but only for Wall Street, not for anybody else. Now that's not, just to say, that's not left-wing rhetoric. I happen to now be the chair of the Global Action Council on Values for the World Economic Forum in Davos. Mohammed Yunus and I used to go speak there. You know him from the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. But we'd be on the 3rd floor at 7 a.m. with all the other nonprofits coming here. When the crisis hit, we got put on the main floor. Crisis! Let's bring on the moral authority people. And so Tony Blair was on that panel that day, and he said, Jim, they must be in crisis because they're having a conversation about values in the market, and they invited you to come. I am having more conversations with CEOs. They come like Nicodemus at night. They do. And they confess their sins. And I do this little book on values in the Christ. I say, I read your book, and the problem is it's worse than what you think on the inside. It's worse than what you think. So the people who caused this, Elizabeth Warren, my dear friend who's the head of the new Consumer Protection Agency, I would have given her, yeah, she's wonderful. By the way, she's a Methodist Sunday school teacher. She tells you she's from a mixed marriage in Arkansas, Methodist and Baptist. You know? And her Christian faith, so she has a great line. She says, we had usury laws since the Code of Hammurabi until 1980. Right? You know about that, James. Code of Hammurabi, 1980. So I would have given Elizabeth Warren a pair of handcuffs and sent her to Wall Street the day after I was inaugurated, but I wasn't inaugurated. So that's how you solve the economy. It's not scarcity, it's just choices. To protect democracy, end government of the money, by the money, and for the money. To end the threat of terrorism, deal with the causes, not just the symptoms. I mean, this is really not that difficult. So with my Jerusalem class, we had the terrorism 2-week study. I put a pie chart on the board from the RAND Corporation. RAND is a think tank for the Pentagon. No lefty think tank Pentagon. How terrorism has been defeated, says top of the pie chart. How it has been defeated. 47% of the time, it's been defeated by usual intelligence, policing, law enforcement activities. 43% of the time been defeated by negotiation, political negotiation. I'm not sure. I think 10% terrorists win. You know how many times terrorism has been defeated by military policy, by wars and military operations? 7% of the time. My students said, well, why aren't we investing all our energy in the stuff that works and not the stuff that doesn't? The solutions, my friends, are not difficult. To heal the terror at home, stop tolerating domestic violence. To solve the crime problem, fix the other scandal and cost of our criminal justice system. I have had the, I see people around here and I said, oh, it's great to see you again. I went to jail with you. And, it's like, remember that great time we had in jail? I've been to jail quite often. And it teaches you a lot about a society is best understood from the bottom and on top. The reality is really revealed by what's happening in things like the criminal justice system. And, most Americans wouldn't believe what happens there every single day. To change our lifestyles, our foreign policy, and save our planet, commit to a clean energy future. You get all three. You have a healthier lifestyle, you reverse climate change, and you end the reason we have fought all these damn wars. It really is as simple as that. But we are not going to invest in that because of Washington. So what I'm suggesting here, and I have a few more, but they're all pretty self-explanatory, is we never get to solutions because of the influences on Washington. Now, some would say, therefore we shouldn't vote. My hope is not in Washington or in government or in voting. My hope is in what I've seen work historically over long periods of time, which are social movements. Social movements are the only thing that ever change history. And virtually all of them, almost every single one, have had a spiritual engine at the core. People of faith. They're never just people of faith. It's always lots of folks. But it's always people of faith at the core. Almost every single one. The abolition of slavery, civil rights, apartheid, women's suffrage. Most of our movements have been fueled by spiritual energy. And the dynamic, or the dance of social change, is that inside, outside, that dance that happens when social movements meet political power. So, for those who didn't want to vote last time, I said things like, well, you all like William Wilberforce. You know William Wilberforce, right? The abolitionists and John Wesley and all the rest. Wilberforce didn't say, I just want Christians not to have slaves. Just let us not have slaves. He said, no, I'm called by God to end the slave trade, the slave traffic, slavery itself. It took 30 years before Wilberforce, who was a convert in the Wesleyan revival, 30 years before it happened, and he died 3 days later because his work was done. But it took Parliament and voting and tough political strategy, and that wouldn't have happened without the movement. So if you saw the movie Amazing Grace, some of you see that, it was about Wilberforce. It was great, but it didn't ever talk about the movement. There was a prairie fire that swept all across England, and that movement made the Wilberforce changes possible. I don't need to say why we got civil rights law in 64, voting rights 65. It was not because of Johnson and Kennedy. It was because, well, let me say the story. Martin King gets his Nobel Peace Prize uh, for the success in the Civil Rights Law, 64. So he's in Scandinavia, he comes home, doesn't even go back to Atlanta, goes to Washington to see the president. Here's the great moral leader, and he's talking to Lyndon Johnson, the master of realpolitik, and he says, now that we have a Civil Rights Law, we need a Voting Rights Act. Johnson says, I cashed in all my chips with the Southern senators. I got no political capital left. I can't get you a Voting Rights Act for at least 5 or 10 years. I can't do it. It's not politically possible. King says, but until we can vote in the South, we can't even enforce the Civil Rights Law. We got to be able to vote. Johnson says, I'd love to do it for you. I really would, but I just can't do it. It isn't politically possible. King was not one to withdraw or complain or just sulk off. He went and organized a campaign. A little town nobody heard of called Selma, Alabama. He picked Jim Clark, the sheriff, for a role in the play he was about to put on. When I did the retreat for the artists, I said, understand that King was putting on plays in Birmingham and Selma for the nation to see. The first call he'd make every time he did a campaign was to Harry Belafonte, an artist. Get the group together in the apartment in Manhattan. I met Harry Belafonte 2 years ago, and he confirmed the story. And Harry get together, Sidney Poitier and Harry and athletes and entrepreneurs and artists and performers, and they talk about strategy and images and changing hearts and minds and what play could you put on. So John Lewis, the youth leader of King's movement, now esteemed member of Congress from Atlanta, John Lewis marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with the young activists, and they got beaten badly. Bloody Sunday was called. John was beaten almost to death on that bridge. Then the call went out to the faith community. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel came down, marched alongside King, the rabbi and the preacher, and the faith community got engaged in Selma, and they marched from Selma to Montgomery, and the nation watched. In 5 months, we had a Voting Rights Act. Not 5 years, 5 months. So I'm on a panel once with Doris Kearns Goodwin, the historian, and she says, and Lyndon Johnson went to a joint session of Congress and called for a Voting Rights Act and a great act of presidential courage. I said, Doris, I'm glad he did. But it wasn't Johnson. It was King. He changed the context. He changed what political reality was. He changed everything, and he made Johnson's courage possible. That's what movements do. And we don't get that yet. And this administration sure doesn't get it yet. Some of you know Clarence Jordan, Koinonia Farms in Georgia, one of my heroes and mentors. They set up an interracial community. We're all talking community. They did that in the 1950s in America's Georgia, rural Georgia. It was tough. I mean, they were shot at most nights. Dorothy Day and the Catholic Worker went down. Friends would go down, and to protect the community, one person would stand or sit in the gate with the light on, saying, don't shoot into this kid's here. If you're going to shoot somebody, shoot me. In the light. They would take turns doing that. Dorothy came down and sat in the chair.